Lesson 3, step by step, build and execute to build your Playwright automation framework. We're going to go through 4 steps, look at the idea and just get familiarized with the code base. Then we're going to do step 2, which is to create our PRD document. That's the what we're building. We're going to look at step 3 then, which is the PRP create, which is detailed document about how to build it. And then step 4, we build it. Step 1 then, let's have a look at the idea, defining the idea, familiarize ourselves with the code base, and then get ready to create the PRD. So you should have at this stage, you should have cloned the repository from the course at-course.git repository. You should have switched to the branch, so git switch, start point, module 1, lesson 1, and you should have opened this in Visual Studio Code so that you've got the initial start point code base. Just to familiarize yourself with the code base, what we've got is the idea document. So that's what we're going to start with in step 1 then. We're going to define that. We've got the .claude folder with all the commands in. So this is where we've got the command to create the PRD document, to create the PRP document, and then to execute and build our framework. We've also got in here the application under test. Now in the real world, this may be embedded in your application under test, or you may link to your application under test as a URL to the app. But for the purpose of this, to keep everything in one place, I've actually added the code to the application under test in here. And what we're testing is this demo website, the internet, which has got a load of test automation components on there that we can test our code against. The next folder then is the PRP documents folder, and in here we've got some documentation for our Claude Code to actually read the documentation about using Claude Code. It helps with the context. We've got the Playwright documentation. Again, in some instances you may be able to use Claude Code to go out to the web and get this documentation, but for completeness, I've included a lot of the Playwright documentation here so that context is available directly to Claude Code on our machine within our project. We've got the templates document. So this is where we say to Claude, go and build me a PRD document, but use this template, or go and build me a PRP document and use this template, etc., etc. Okay, and then we've got the readme.md file in the PRP folder, and this details the overall process. Worth having a read through this to give you a bit more understanding of what this is all about. But predominantly this is for Claude Code to use. It's more context that enables Claude Code to build exactly what we want first shot, first time. So to complete step 1 then, we define our idea, and in the course we're using this website, and what I've said is I want to create a Playwright project in TypeScript, and the application under test is at this URL. I've said we've got the source for the application under test in this directory, and we've got the Playwright documentation in this folder, along with the API documentation for Playwright in a subfolder as well. I've made it explicitly clear that I do not want Claude Code to install the application under test at the moment. I just want it to use the code that we've got. And then I've said I want you to create an initial test suite with a few test cases only to cover the checkbox functionality. I don't want it spending half an hour writing all of the tests for the whole application, because we're going to see that in module 2, the process and the workflow for building tests. So once you're familiar with the code base, you may want to tweak the idea a little bit, or you may just be ready to move on to step 2, where we'll create the PRD. Step 2 then. We want to create our PRD document, our product requirements document. And our product in this instance is our Playwright framework in TypeScript. So this is all about defining what we want to build. And the inputs to this then. We've got the IDEA.md file, which we looked at in step 1. We've got a template which provides context to the Claude Code command that we're going to execute, and that command is the PRP planning create command, and that will create our PRD document. So if you go to your repository, then you want to start Claude Code in that directory. When you're on the branch for start point module 1 lesson 1, and in Claude Code then we are going to run our first command. So the commands we have available to us are all provided in the .claude commands directory, so you can type this slash for the slash commands and it'll automatically pick up PRP, and we want to use the planning create command. Okay. Now you can open this command, it's in Markdown, the planning create command, and you'll see in here create planning, transform a rough idea into comprehensive PRD document with rich visual documentation. It takes an argument, and that argument is our IDEA file. So the argument we pass in is the relative path to the IDEA document. And what this will do is it will do some research. It will generate the PRD document based on the template. So PRP's templates, PRP planning template. So in here we'll see the templates, PRP planning template. So it's going to use that as the input, and in here it talks about what we want in that PRD document. So we want user flows, architecture, sequences, data models. We want to do some research, look at the user stories for this, some acceptance criteria, and an implementation strategy. So this will give us our PRP document when we execute this command. So if I execute that command, you'll see Claude Code head off and start running through all of the steps in that command. And you see here it's already breaking it down into a number of to-do actions. So we've got analyze the idea, research Playwright, we've got examine the app under test, we've got review the Playwright documentation in the folder which we provided, analyze the functionality we want to test, and create the PRD document. You might be presented with a number of prompts as it goes through this, so you do want to read these and you do want to review them and select the option that's best for you. So do we want Claude Code to go off and do a web search on Playwright TypeScript best practices? Well, I'm going to prompt yes on all of these and step through these, and once this is finished, takes a few minutes, we'll come back and we'll look at what we've got in the PRD document. So the final bit then is that you'll see that Claude Code will tick off all of those to-dos, and it will create the PRD document, which you'll find in your Visual Studio Explorer under the name probably Playwright Test Framework.md with the PRD extension to indicate that you've created a PRD document for you. It'll give you a few highlights on that, on what it's created, but essentially this is the what we want to build. So there's executive summary, the problem statement, solutions, some user stories set in there, and acceptance criteria, technical notes, and you'll find also that there'll be some mermaid markdown diagrams in there which will give you a bit more of a visual view of the architecture that it's proposing that's built. And as we scroll down, you'll see some samples of code for page object model, test runner configuration, lots of detail about what it is we want to build prior to us running and creating the PRP itself. And as Claude Code says at the bottom here, the PRD document provides everything needed to implement a robust, maintainable Playwright test framework focused on the checkbox functionality, clear patterns for future expansion, and other areas of the application. Now, the key point here, and the really important point, is that you want to review this document. And yes, that might take you half an hour to an hour, but that's half an hour to an hour. That's a lot less than actually building out a framework yourself from start to finish. But mistakes or inconsistencies or areas of this document that maybe you don't want implemented, functionality that it's picked up on that's got wrong, you want to capture that now and correct it now, because mistakes compound very quickly when you start building things out at the PRP stage and the actual build stage itself. So get this right and it provides you with a much better foundation for getting your Playwright framework built correctly first time. Now, if you haven't got the time to go through this in detail now as part of the course, I will provide a link below to the edited and the updated version that I've reviewed and that I feel comfortable using in the next stage of this process. So step 3 then, we're going to create the PRP document, the product requirements prompts document, and this is the how to build it. And we're going to feed into this the PRD document that we've just created. So if I go back to my Visual Studio Code, you'll see here that I've been through the original PRD document that it created. I've edited it, reviewed it, tweaked it where I feel it needs tweaking to make sure that I've got a solid foundation for the next couple of stages. And what we're doing next then is we're taking this document and we're going to run the next command in the sequence of steps. And that command is the PRP Playwright TypeScript create command. So again, this is a Claude Code / command that we've defined. You can open it and you can look at it. And what this says is create Playwright TypeScript PRP. Pass in an argument. That argument is the PRD document. And the mission of this is to create a comprehensive Playwright PRP that enables one-pass test implementation through systematic research and context curation. Okay, so in here is all the instructions for it to create the PRP document for a Playwright project using our PRD. So what I do here is I use the / command, PRP Playwright TypeScript create command. The argument it needs is my edited and reviewed PRD document. Copy the relative path to that and paste that in there. So before I kick that off, let's just give you a bit more context of what gets fed in at this stage. So we have got our PRD document that we created in step 2. We've got the command we're going to run, which we've just looked at, which is this PRP Playwright TS create command. But we're also feeding in a template so it knows what it's expected to produce based on that template. We're feeding in the README, which is the documentation about what this whole PRP process is about. And we're feeding in a Claude.md file. That's memory that contains some more context information that's useful for Claude Code when it's developing this. So we have got the templates from there, PRP Playwright TS template. We've got the README document, which is here. We've got our Playwright PRD document, which is here, and we've got our Claude.md file, and we've got also the command itself. So I'm ready to run that now. When I run that, again, you may get prompted a couple of times by Claude to see if it's okay for it to go off and research stuff on the web, but this will essentially create a to-do list based on the command itself, the PRP create command, and will follow through on its own to-do list, which involves analysing the PRD, the README, the TypeScript code-based patterns, the application under test, and it will create a comprehensive PRP with all the context it needs to build that framework. Okay, so I'll return in a moment. Once that's completed, it'll take a few minutes, and we'll see what that PRP document, the how to build our framework document, has come along. So on completion, then you'll see that Claude Code has created a PRP document, and it's even given it a score of 9 out of 10 confidence level in terms of a one-pass implementation success. And whilst I'm not particularly happy with the name it's given it, because it's made it a bit more orientated towards the checkbox stuff, this PRD document itself, when we open it and look at it, does seem to cover all of the bases that we need in terms of building that initial framework. So we've got why, what, success criteria, context, gotchas, the file structure and folder structure for the project itself, known gotchas, data models, data structures. It's a really comprehensive document, prompting document that will enable us to create this framework with the next step in the process. What I would say again is it's really important to review these documents, Make sure that it's captured everything you want it to and correct any mistakes you find, because mistakes will get amplified as we go further through the process. What I'll do now then is actually modify, update and tweak this a bit, having reviewed it, and then we'll move on to step 4, which is the actual execution of the PRP to create our framework in TypeScript. So the final step then is to run the PRP execute command, which will take the PRP document we created in step 3 and it'll build it. So the inputs that we're going to use to this stage of the process, again, the PRP README document, which gives Claude Code an overview of the whole process, the Claude.md memory file, the PRP document that we've just created, and then we'll run this command PRP Playwright TS execute. And from that, we should get our TypeScript project that has implemented our Playwright automation code. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm just going to rename this because I don't like the name of this. If we rename that to Playwright Test Framework.prp. And again, it's really important if you're doing this for a production code base that you go through this and review all of this, make sure that it's going to implement everything you want and take out everything you don't want. But for now though, what I'm going to do is take the Claude Code editor and we are going to use this PRP Playwright TypeScript execute command. And again, you can view this command, you can see what it does. And it takes an argument. The argument is the PRP document, and then it will follow the PRP specifications exactly, and it will do some validation, quality checks at the start and the end, environment setup, and it will go ahead and create your Playwright test. So this is a command you can reuse against many different PRP documents for different applications. So again, Claude Code / command PRP TypeScript execute, and then we want to use the PRP document, so I'll copy the relative path for that, paste that in there, and then we can run that command and generate our code. So we should see the framework code and directory structure created as it is described in this PRP document once this is complete. Again, you might get prompted for a few things, so you can read those prompts and questions it provides you with, and you'll need to accept or deny those depending on your environment and what you're looking to do. But I'll return once that's run through and we can have a look at the code and the execution of this framework code base once it's completed the development work. So you may find, like I did, that Claude Code starts executing your tests once it's created the project and starts trying to fix any issues that it finds automatically. So I've already got some of those tests it's created passing, and I can see that Claude Code is making an effort to check what it's written and make sure that it works, for instance, across all browsers. So this is a good sign. It's created the project, it's running its validation tests, and I'm just waiting for it to complete those validation tests before I take a look and run these tests myself. So we're getting closer as Claude Code tests all of this against the different browser types. I've just got one issue with Firefox, which is actually blocked by my antivirus software, but Claude Code is doing its best to finish off those validation checks before it hands the project back to me for me to check it. In fact, I think it's given up on Firefox. It's actually saying, working on most browsers, I think it was Firefox that it stopped, but I actually had a prompt come up from Norton to stop it running Firefox automatically. But Claude Code has done its job. It has created the project. It has run those validation tests to check that it can pass the first few set of tests. And I think we're pretty close to having a folder structure ready for us to review and run manually ourselves. So I think I'm actually going to stop it here by pressing the escape key, because you can see here that it's created the Playwright test folder and it's run a load of the edge cases that it had written itself across different browsers, and it was just checking them against different browser types. So we can come back to this in a minute, but pretty much I think that initial set of test cases is actually running and working. So just have a quick look at what it's created. You can see here it's created the folder structure, we've got the page objects, we've got the node modules, we've got the fixtures, we've got the utilities, etc. So it looks like everything's in place. All I want to do now is just run this manually myself just to make sure that the framework's actually in place, and then we can look at doing some more testing and documentation in the next lesson. So I'm actually going to use the command that Claude Code has provided me with here as it's gone through things, and we're going to copy that and paste that in there. Actually what we'll do is we'll do that from another terminal just to make sure we're running it outside of Claude Code. So we're in the right folder, paste that in there, and we're going to put Chromium, and then we're going to put -- headed on the end just to make sure we get to see it running, and we'll just check to see that that implementation has worked. So here we go, running the first few tests. I've got 2 workers running here, and there we go, first set of tests are running, and all of that has been developed, created, run and tested without me touching a single line of code. So in the next lesson we're going to look at testing this in a bit more depth, creating some README, some getting started and some architecture documents just to tidy up the project, and from there we'll then move on to the next module, which covers implementing and creating more tests. So we've completed the 4 steps to building our framework and implementing that first set of tests. We started with an idea. From that idea we created our PRD, which is our what we want to build document, defining the build of our Playwright TypeScript project. We then used that PRD document to create our detailed project requirements prompts, our PRP document, and from that PRP document we ran our execute command that then created our framework. So really all that we've got left on step 5 is just to run some initial tests, and you saw in the last section that we can run those tests with the standard Playwright command. So npx playwright test, we'll use that specification document, run it in Chromium, use 2 workers, and we'll do it in headed just to make sure it's, if we want to see it on the desktop, or we can run it in the background mode in headless mode. What we need, because we're already in that directory, we can get rid of the first part of that command and just run the npx playwright test checkboxes. Okay, so that should run and then give us a report at the end of that. What I want to concentrate on next then is what we need to do to tidy up this project and finish it off before we start moving on to adding more tests.